Hey, everybody. Good afternoon. How's everybody doing today? You guys all excited for the long weekend? Anybody got any solid plans? What's up, Anthony? What's up, TJ? Bandit? Christian? Good afternoon, Eddie. How's it hanging? No one's doing anything this weekend? Thinking about making some last minute plans. I don't have anything planned. I was thinking about last minute getting a place upstate, New York or Vermont or something. Maybe doing a little hiking, mountain biking, something like that. It'd be fun. That's how I like to do it. I don't really want the responsibility of dog ownership, but I like dogs, so going away. All right, cool. I guess let's jump in. I'm an associate member of T3 Trading Group, which is an SEC registered broker dealer and member of FINRA SIPC. All trades placed by me are placed through T3 Trading Group. You should carefully consider whether trading is suitable for you in light of your own financial condition. Position disclosure is the same plus unity. Kept a little bit of it compared to what I had, just a little bit left. Big move in that thing today. Big move for the markets today. Let's jump in. Let's take a look at these charts. What's going on, Nick? All right, how do we close? So spies here. Looks like we down ticked small from the close, but as of right now, up a percentage point on the day. He was up 1.6, IWM up 1.4. So pretty broad-based rally. A little bit of relative strength from the Qs. Qs up now 1.7 and IWM up 1.4. But it was a pretty broad-based rally. There was good intraday flips between relative strength and relative weakness, but for the most part, um, the tide rose all of the ships higher. I haven't used that expression in a while. The open was a little bit tricky. So let's recap, right? So we discussed this morning as we were kind of having like a flat-ish open. At one point, when I was first kind of logging in, the spies were flat, the IWM was down small, and the Qs were up small. By the time we did I lose audio? You guys hear me? Ugh. Can you guys hear me on YouTube? It's the second time. In the morning meeting also. Dum de dum de dum. This morning in the morning meeting when I briefly lost it, I just logged off and on. Can you hear me now? Test, 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 test. Does anyone know if the YouTube continued to work? All right. Audio good on YouTube. All right, thanks guys. But you're getting a black screen on YouTube. That's odd. What is going on? Huh, that's weird. Hold on, let me see something here with the settings. Why did that change? This is this new system that the tech team put me on for YouTube. This OBS it's called, but the monitor source changed. I don't really know how to fix it. I don't know how to use this software as well as the other one. I wonder if I can add on another software. I'm just gonna play with this for like a second. Whoa. It's the wrong screen. Wow, there we go. I hope that worked. Did that work? No, it doesn't look like it worked. I'm gonna give myself one more second on this. I really don't have time to play these games. That's frustrating. You can see settings now. Good? All right. Cool. Well, look at that. Next thing you know, I'm going to be an IT guy. The IT people at T3 better watch out. If you know how inept I am at tech, then you definitely know that that's a joke. But I actually fixed something all by myself. All right. No more messing around. Let's jump into it. So what I was talking about was I started to talk about um coming into today, we had like a flattish open after pretty much closing on lows yesterday, which always makes it a little bit tricky. A lot of times when you close on lows, you kind of think that previous day low needs to break in order to go higher. That's not always true, especially, yesterday was a smaller candle. If it was a big, like negative Maribozu, it might be different. So we didn't end up breaking yesterday's low, but we really finally got right into the support zone. And it took, I think today's day 7, right? So we peaked out on the 15th. The 16th was day 1 of corrective action. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Yeah, today's day 7. And again, I just I'm really impressed with the team. And look, I'm gonna be honest, I don't want to overly toot my own horn because I'm wrong a lot also. And I really try to admit a lot when I'm wrong, but I'm honestly kind of impressed with myself too. I just feel like I've been calling this market like really perfectly recently, with like very good consistency to it. And literally back here at highs on the 15th into the 16th, we said that we're going to require a broader correction this time, a bigger correction through price and time. And I think very specifically, I mentioned the space between 430 and 432 as a support zone where we can look for that broader correction to find some support and then maybe actually turn up. And I have been discussing like overselling in the market could be a problem because then you have to reverse back up as opposed to just pivoting back up. I'm trying to find a good example. Like if you look at this lemonade as just a quick example of what I mean by having to reverse back up as opposed to just pivoting back up. Like you can look at this lemonade chart from May through June, just a phenomenal move off of a great earnings report back here in the beginning of May. It great move for a month and a half, going from $13 post earnings, pre earnings $11, all the way up to almost 22, pretty much 100% upside move here in 2 months. And then it began its technical pullback, which is fine and normal. And we discussed how when you break these ascending channels, that feedback cycles come into play and a feedback cycle of selling can come in. But this is too big. Like now here as you get below these moving averages and then this 8 begins to point down, this 21 begins to point down, the 8 has like a bearish cross, and I'm not a huge believer in bearish bullish moving average crosses. I'm much more of a believer just in the definition of trend and uptrend and a downtrend. But when you pull back to this much below that equilibrium zone, which I think we spent a good amount of time talking about in yesterday's afternoon meeting, that's when you like in order for this lemonade to come back up, you need it to really reverse back up. Like you need this thing to like it's not really making a pattern of lower highs and lower lows. For the most part, this has just been down since it broke its channel. But you kind of really need this thing to move back up and then create a higher low and almost create. I don't want to. Reversal is the wrong word because it's not currently downtrending, but the pullback is so deep that you're probably not just getting a pivot low at 1667, and then a handful of days later, you find yourself making new highs like you would in more of this accelerated trend that we saw here for May and June. So if we go back to the market, we're still in an area here where you could just pivot back up and go. If you pull back much further, this is what I was trying to say in the morning meeting, if you really begin to lose like 430 on a closing basis, we have to look at our next major support levels, which is probably down at like 425. If you get down to 425, this ADMA is going to start just what I was showing with Lemonade, the 80 EMA is going to start pointing down. Eventually, the 21 EMA can roll over and point down. They might do a cross. And then at a certain point, you need like almost what I was trying to describe of like a reversal back higher, for lack of a better term. This pullback here thus far, it's just a pullback to the 21 EMA. It is over the course of 7 days. It's a deeper, broader price and time correction than what we had seen since we really broke out in the second half of May and the beginning of June here. But it's not so deep that we can't just pivot and kind of continue our trend. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I actually think that we, even though today was a great day one, and we could see some follow through on a day two, tomorrow perhaps, and some continuation this week. Um, you, that could lead to a broader consolidation here, bigger picture bull flag or bigger picture wedge or bigger picture pennant. I actually think that that's the highest probability situation. We never pulled back so much that it actually became a problem. It's just that we had gone up so much so fast that it just made logical sense that we need to have a bigger time slash price correction. And we got that. And we got it, I think we literally said on the 15th and 16th that this is what makes sense, where we actually got net short. I got net short personally for the first time the entire calendar year, on the 15th into the 16th. And we can look for a pullback. Well, where is border support? Border support's at, 430-ish, right? And at that time, the 21 EMA, when we were making highs on the 15th, the 21 EMA was all the way down at 426.29. So you think about, the market moving down to equilibrium while equilibrium moves up to the market. And it just would kind of line up with this equilibrium area catching up, or the lower band is represented by the 21 EMA to this 430 area, to see if it adds additional kind of support in equilibrium and we can pivot up. That's what I've been waiting for 7 days. The game plan each day was like, okay, like I'll nibble back, I'll piece out of the shorts, I'll nibble back a little bit in the longs. In case we do get momentum continuation of this parabolic move, which I felt was becoming a lower probability than a broader consolidation. But really, I want to wait to get heavier until we get closer to this 430 to 432 area. So it wasn't really until like yesterday into this morning that I actually started, adding my size a little bit bigger back to the long side of the market, looking for the pivot to now potentially come in, looking for the market to get supported. And I mean that worked great as a day one here. What happens tomorrow? Do we get a day two? Maybe. I still think that there's a pretty good probability that we get a bigger consolidation still. It could be like a wedge type, consolidation where, maybe you're drawing a trend line from like the May 24th low to this low, and we get another higher low, but it's in conjunction with a lower high, and you kind of begin to build a wedge, or maybe it's just a sideways channel, aka a bull flag that kind of comes into play. I don't necessarily think that we, bounce off of this 430 area yesterday slash this morning, and by 4th of July we're making new highs and we're approaching 450 in the spies. It's big move. I think we might need a little bit more digestion than that, and that's assuming that the bull trend even continues to stay in place. But so far, so good. Just being patient here over the course of 7 days, beginning to build back into the longs, seeing if the market can find support. And then just when we finally get into our area and we say it's potentially go time, do we get our biggest update since the top? Today was a really good day if you're bullish. The breadth was very broad. You could have been involved in tech. You could have been involved in like a lot of different things were really going today. Retail was going today. Like Ford and GM were running today. The airlines were running today. There was a lot of things that you could have been involved in. Breath was really strong to be able to make some money for yourself. And it's exactly when we were looking for it to happen from the perspective of the market. Same thing with the Qs. Qs we had mentioned the space between 357.50 and 360, and that is exactly where we got to. Yesterday's low is 357.59. That's the exact same thought process that I just mentioned with the spies. We went parabolic here. Let's look for that deeper pullback. Where does that deeper pullback make sense? Well, where is our last previous resistance that we broke out from? It's really kind of, 355 to 357.50 plus this 21 EMA will continue to catch up as the market pulls back to it. And interestingly enough, I'm just seeing this right now. The Qs are up 1.6, 1.7%. I guess we're down a couple ticks here after hours. And it's actually an inside day for the Qs. So that's interesting. We'll look at 365 tomorrow is starting to establish itself as some resistance for the Qs. We'll see if we can break out of that. We'll see if we can get an inside and up. We'll see if we can get a day two tomorrow. But we got down to our support zone and same thing. One of the biggest, if not the biggest, up day since the market peaked just over a week ago. So, I mean, just perfect, exactly what we're looking for. IWM also. In an ideal situation, we never would have lost 184. We had good rotation back on the 21st, but then the IWM was relatively weak on the 22nd and 23rd. It lost with the 184 level. It pulled back to the very key level of 180. 180 is massively important for the IWM. My line in the sand I've been saying is 178.93, so we never really tested that, but we certainly tested and held 180. We discussed in the morning meeting today that if you just look at the IWM in a vacuum, yesterday's candle does not look good. It looks like it's applying pressure on 180. But if you don't look at it in a vacuum, which you never should, and you see just how weak the Nasdaq was yesterday and the S&P was a little bit weaker, the fact that this gave an upside tail yesterday is not the end of the world because it's actually showing relative strength. And if the SPYs and Qs can bounce off of support, then this thing could also have a strong day and get back above yesterday's high, which is exactly what happened. So, I mean, market just doing exactly what we're looking for. With that said, the action was tricky this morning, though. That first half hour or so, we had some rotating relative strength and relative weakness from the space between 9:30 and 10, and then 10 a.m. we had that number hit. We had was it Richmond Fed number and new home sales, I think is what hit. Um, and they seem to be pretty bullish for the economy, those numbers. But that gave us a real quick relative strength and relative weakness flip, which you can never really see in the SPYs, but you look at the difference between the Qs and the IWM. The Qs here were trying to be pretty strong this first half hour, though they were certainly struggling a bit with that 360. The IWM was a bit concerning off the open. If you were looking at the market this morning and you were thinking like, hey, SPYs and Qs finally getting the support. Let's see if we can rock and roll. And then you see that first candle coming in the IWM. You're like, oh, this is not what I want. And I remember us saying, we really need the IWM to clear the opening high. We really need the IWM to clear the opening high. So first 30 minutes, you got this relative weakness from the IWM, some relative strength from the Qs. The 10 a.m. number hits. It points to a pretty good signal for the economy. And what does a really good economy kind of mean for the market now? Well, it means that your retail names can run, right? I mean, look at what Macy's did, post 10 a.m. This thing caught a really big bid. Look at Nordstrom post 10 a.m. Ford was upticking post 10 a.m. GM was upticking post 10 a.m. Kind of these, lower multiple companies that people are spending money. They're going to be spending money kind of in these places. We're able to catch a bid, and then things that are more affected by the fact that the Fed, on the other hand, can now keep interest rates higher for longer. They have an all clear sign to potentially hike even further. You see your TLT catch a real big move to the downside, so interest rates moving higher, and then all of a sudden your Qs. I don't think that this tail here at 10 a.m., this upside tail is real. But your Qs, which were just beginning to battle to get back above 360, are now breaking below 360 and making new lows on the day. So it was a pretty tricky, sleepy open. I took a lot of comfort though from this IWM breaking highs. And the real confirmation for me was actually at 10:15, right? At 10 a.m., the news number hits, you break highs. The 10:05 candle is concerning in conjunction with what the Nasdaq is doing. This candle comes in at 10:10. It starts by being pretty weak. You actually break the low from the 10 a.m. starting point, which we know is always a concern, real briefly, and then we tail back up and we break that high, and then we just begin to go. And then eventually, breath just kind of caught up. The IWM here was starting to go. Your KREs of the world were starting to go. I think energy started trying to tick highs. Financials were trying to tick highs. All those were trying to be leaders. The Qs were being really weak. It took the Qs another hour to actually get above 360 and then go into this upside grindy trend. For me, this is really difficult. I don't like putting on a ton of risk at 11:30 in the morning. It's a terrible time of the day. And it's like, okay, fine, the Qs are finally ticking above 360, but it's 11:30. Do I really want to be buying the Qs, with both hands, looking for a move to retest 365 intraday today when they couldn't even break pre 11:30 and just broke new lows, and we're being negatively impacted by that 10 a.m. number. That's a really hard trade. So if you're kind of implementing more of a portfolio approach and your bigger picture, and you're looking at what we were looking at with the daily chart, then maybe you're just not really caring about this volatility as much and this choppiness as much, because the market's finally getting into an area where you're building in or building back into your positions. And that's certainly some of what I was doing. But if you're trying to like very actively trade the price action here this first couple of hours, it was very difficult for a lot of these types of names. Though if you were involved in more of these IWM related names post 10 a.m., I actually don't think that that was too difficult. Um, First half hour took you for the IWM, but finally this inside five and up right before 10 a.m., leading to a break of highs, and then this pivot low here. And it's not like the Q's going at 11:30; it's the IWM starting to break up at 10 a.m., where things are still a lot more tradable. So, I think from a market perspective, the market did exactly what we wanted, big picture. But sometimes when the market does what you want, the execution of that can still be really tricky. And it seems like the execution of the long side of the market, especially for Qs and to some degree these spies, which really only took off post 11 a.m. also, was a little bit more difficult. Um, with that said, I think our list today was super on point. We talked about looking at these airlines long. I ended up not being involved in them. I was very much focused on that Unity, which I can talk about in a second. But Delta reaffirmed their guidance. It looked fantastic. They increased their guidance, as they restated it, I should say, updated it. We talked about Delta long versus like 45, 43 quarter. The low is 43.37. The intraday trend on this thing, if you were focused on it, was fantastic. Great little inside five break here at 9:55 a.m. just as the ADMA is catching up to the base of the bull flag. We spent some time talking about bull flag continuation yesterday. I mean, they really did not make this very difficult at all to get stock, to be totally honest, in this first half hour. If you could have been buying versus that 43 quarter we discussed, or if you're patient, this inside five here was 11 cents risk. You could have bought 43.88 and caught a $3 move off of that, which is just phenomenal. We talked about UAL as a secondary. That one also worked really well, clearing through 54 resistance on the daily chart. Rex called out, I think it was this inside five at 9:45 into the VTF. If not, then it was this inside five at 9:55, which is pretty much the exact same play as Delta. This kind of flag pattern, little price time correction, the ADMA catching up, the inside bars breaking up. They never shake out either of these tight inside fives, and just works with continuation. I mean, that one was fantastic as well. So those were great. I was looking at US Steel and Cliff. They were tricky because they didn't really wake up until the 10 a.m. number hit and the IWM started to outperform. We talked about US Steel through 24. Probably tricky to be able to get an entry on that. We talked about trying to go long CLF versus 16. Also real tricky because, weak in the beginning of the day. It did hold 16 by a couple of pennies, but for me personally, if I see this weakness at the beginning of the day, I'm probably not jumping into it. And then it took the 10 a.m. number in the IWM to wake up for these names to actually start to go and catch up a little bit. So not easy US Steel and CLF, but they did end up working if you were able to get involved. And then, for me, Unity was really the focus. I had a lot of conviction in this one. I got to give myself a pat on the back on it. I had conviction. I went after it. I put a lot of risk on in it. It was my biggest position, and turned out to be my best name, and I got paid really well in it. And I still felt like I could have gotten better pricing, to be honest. I still feel like I could have done a better job on the entry. Just It's always these tech problems, man. It's so brutal. I'm having a weird issue with this new computer, and it's a really good computer. It's like a Asus or whatever. It wasn't cheap by any means. For whatever reason, everything works great with it, except for when I do like Zoom type meetings, Zoom and Google Meet type meetings. The sound is atrocious when the other people are talking. They sound like muffled robots. But if I'm listening to a YouTube video or I'm listening to Pat speak on the VTF, everything sounds just fine. It's very specifically when I am in like a Google Meets video or a Zoom video. It doesn't really matter what application it is, which is very bizarre. And then if I even were to try to play a YouTube video at the same time, which normally works well, then the sound on that is really bad also. So I was a little behind on my research this morning because I was just trying a million different things to try to get sound to work on video conference calls, and I couldn't really figure it out. And then I started doing my research, and I was looking at Unity. Pat posted that Unity news at like 7:35 or something. It was like the first thing that he posted, and you still could have gotten pretty good pricing there. $38 or better, from when he actually posted it. I ended up chasing price a little bit, but I liked it so much. I really liked the news. I really like what the stock is doing right now. I really like the technical spot on the daily chart. That I just said, you know what, I want size on this, and I'm going to take size, and I'm going to give it space. And if I'm wrong, I'm probably going to get smoked on it. But I had a pretty large degree of confidence. The technicals here, really liked. First of all, we had discussed back here on June 5th, and I was already mad at myself for missing that trade when Apple did its announcement of the Vision Pro or whatever it's called, the announced Unity basically as a partner for developing of games or something like that. And I remember I knew that this thing was like decently short floated and could really squeeze higher. It has the ability to move. And I'm like a complete idiot. I went inside bid at like 31.50 or 32 or something like that to get stock, knowing that it was important instead of just taking the offer. I didn't get any stock. I missed the entire initial move up to 39.50 that day by being cheap for a couple of pennies on the execution, and then the subsequent move all the way up to $45. Really? For anybody on YouTube, people in the VTF just lost audio again. What the heck? Give me 1 second. What the? YouTube audio still works? I gotta contact tech. Wow, that happened 3 times now. Looks like I think I'm back here on the VTF. I don't know what's going on. Very frustrating. Anyway, you're talking about that initial move on the Apple Vision Pro stuff, which I thought was a pretty big deal. Bull flag continuation through 38 on the 13th. Gets really extended, tops out with a daily shooting star on OK volume on the 16th. Great technical pullback here to just about $36. That's kind of previous level of the flag to some degree with the 21 EMA there. This is already, where you want this to pivot. And this goes back to exactly what we were just talking about earlier with the spies and versus with lemonade and the spies. How lemonade's kind of like pulled back too deep on those moving averages, getting well below the 21. 8 starts to point down, 21 starts to point down. They cross. You almost need like a full reversal to come in. This, I know it's a big move on a percentage basis, 45 to 36, but this had such a big move. You get this thing down to the 21. Yeah, it's holding there for a few days. The ADMA started to downslope, but the 21 never did because it never even gets below the 21. So it's like a good technical spot here already. I loved the idea of having stock versus 37.50, which is kind of a little bit of an area here, or even $38 for a break and for continuation. I was too slow this morning. Pat's so on point getting the news in there. You could have easily had stock at 38 or below 38. And I also really like the news, by the way. It seems significant, with the big AI craze going on right now. This is the first company I've heard of that's making like a, I don't know, version of their app store or whatever specific for AI. I'm sure I'm messing that up a little bit for the techies that are out there. But there's just a lot to like between the news and the technicals. So I kind of said, you know what, screw it. Um, I'm just gonna take a decent sized position here around 38.40 or so, pre-market, and I'll build in too. I had more bids in at 38.26 that never got filled. I think I was the inside bid there. I had a pretty significant bid at 38.01 that obviously never got filled. So I was ready to buy even more if I could get some sort of opening pullback in the beginning of the day with a plan on giving all that risk down to 37.50 because I liked it that much. But I also said to myself, there's a chance that they don't fill any of those bids. They don't pull this thing back at all off that news, and they just squeeze this thing higher right out of the gate. So I'm not gonna rely on like a lot of times if it's gapping up a little bit bigger than I'm comfortable and I'm like, wow, I'm taking on a lot of risk. I'm not sure if the risk reward here is totally gonna be worth it. What I end up doing is I take a small feeling and then I put those bids in, like I was just describing, to try to get some size, and or I wait for the intraday signal to come in to be able to get some size. And in this situation, I just had a pretty good amount of conviction on it, and I just said, sure, I'm gonna put those bids in lower to try to get more stock. I can also look for a signal intraday to get heavier, but I'm not even gonna wait. I'm just gonna buy a lot of stock. So I bought a lot of stock between like 38, probably 38, 38, 38.50. I think I had bids get filled, or I took and or took the offer between those prices on a number of occasions. And then they opened this thing up, and it just worked out really well. I mean, here's those early kind of pre-market executions that I was just talking about. Yeah, this is me. I'm like, I'm buying some, and then this is me going, you know what? I want even more, and then I bid up to 38.51. I got partial, I got filled the rest, and then the thing just really just took off right at the open and paid great and paid me really well. So, um, you love when that happens. You love when you do the research, you have conviction, you put the risk on, and it actually works out. It's a pretty good feeling. So yeah, I think that basically kind of sums up the day. Between the market and the names that we looked at, it was pretty much a fantastic day. Maybe a little bit tricky with the QQQ intraday charting, and the fact that the queues didn't really start going until like 11:30. But everything that we were looking at, the airlines, this unity, the individual names, the rotation, it all worked really, really well. That IWM break of highs at 10 a.m. It was all there. And from a big picture perspective, I mean, it's just a great call for a bigger up move to actually come in today after 7 days of rest of price and time correction of a really big move. So I hope everybody had a really good day. And if you didn't, that's fine too. Just make sure that you're continuing to learn. I remember, there still are days, but especially when I was a newer trader, plenty of days where I was like, man, I should have killed it, and for whatever reason, I just didn't. And that's okay as long as you're learning from it and continuing to improve. So that's all I got for you guys. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Excuse me. All right, scrolling up here on the VTF. I think the first thing I'm seeing is from Anthony. I spotted Unity earlier this morning before the VTF started up and was going to go in pre-market. When I saw it was hard to borrow, I regrettably took a pass. Okay, but you're going long. Um, I got caught in another hard to borrow name a few weeks ago, MAXN. At the time of the MAXN trade, I didn't understand that you couldn't have equal share stop loss and limit orders on the hard to borrow. Yeah, I mean, it just thinks you're getting short. If you've got an L in the upper right hand corner of your level 2, if you're on light speed, a green E means it's easy to borrow, a gray L means it's hard to borrow, a red T means it's impossible to borrow. So if it's hard to borrow with that gray L, you can get a locate. You just have to pay for it. But it can be a little bit tricky sometimes because the machine can think that you are um, trying to get short, right? So if you had 1,000 shares long and you had 1,000 shares worth of offers out and you try to have 1,000 shares worth of stop in, you have 2,000 shares worth of sell orders out, but you only own 1,000 shares. So the machine could think that that could be between those orders trying to short, which could get you legally short. I think there might be, and if Pat's here, maybe you can confirm a setting adjustment that you can make that can give a little bit of leeway to that on the back end where they'll let a trader, up to a point be able to have a stop and offers out. But I'll let Pat talk about it if it's possible or not. Um, I put my limit orders in first as price was going up. Then I tried to put a stop in without success. By the time I got word after the trade desk clarification from Pat, I was deep in the red. Yeah, I mean, you shouldn't be deep in the red unless the thing's moving extraordinarily fast and you're very heavy. Okay. All right, got it. So just kind of giving a warning sign on how hard to borrow stocks can work from Anthony. From Ben, I took DAL at 943. At 943. Okay. You're looking for the pure momentum on that trade on the break of the inside five, and I got stopped out of the next candle 946. Yeah, I mean that's the problem. Like I always say with the pure momentum trades, is that you can get kicked out of trades that work. If the ADMA has, I hate when the ADMA is not on my stop. I do it once in a while, but I hate when I have a stop that's above the ADMA because you can easily get chicken out of trades and not know that you're wrong. Um, and there are people here in the room that are better momentum traders than I am. I'm really not a pure momentum trader. I can trade momentum. I do it sometimes, but I like to have my stop a little bit looser where I can um feel confident that I'm getting stopped out that the idea itself was wrong. And if you're taking this trade that you're describing to me, there's no way you know that the idea itself is wrong. It's just too extended at that time. The 940 candle, the ADMA is still down at 43.50. So you almost have to give it to lows. By the time this inside five breaks up, the ADMA is kind of caught up to this pivot. So you could use that, or you could even use the low of the inside five. The ADMA catches up to that low pretty quickly. I did not take the inside five and up at 10 or 10:10 a.m. because I wanted to save my risk bullets for other trades and was worried about losing a ton of money quickly by taking every inside five and up in the same stocks to work. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. You just gotta recognize that this is a very different trade than the first trade that you're taking. And if you are taking that pure momentum trade, I don't like the idea of a lot of dollar risk for it. Which isn't to say that not, you could do a lot of tier size because a lot of times the pure momentum trades have like very small space risk. So if you're right, you can still get paid pretty well because you got a lot of size, not a lot of risk. But it's not something that I would put a tremendous amount of my days worth of dollar risk on a pure momentum trade where the ADMA hasn't caught up. I just personally think that this is such a better trade here when this thing's breaking up at about 10 a.m. Was it a good trade that didn't work? Again, it's a momentum trade, so they have a very high probability of kind of failing, but the name's still working. So I think that the trade itself is fine. I would just say that for me, like that's never going to be an A plus trade for me. Um, those pure momentum style trades for the way that I trade. There's too high of a probability of a shakeout. And yeah, and again, this is also the problem. Your last question here is, should I have gotten back in because the thesis hadn't changed and airlines were still strong? I'm gonna say yes. Um, I'm gonna say yes, you should have, because the thesis hadn't changed. It never proved that your idea was wrong. And if anything, that later trade's probably the better trade. And this is where I used to get in trouble some years ago, and this is why I don't trade this way anymore, is because I would have tight stops into momentum trades, get stopped out like how you got stopped out, not know that my idea was wrong, and then I would just start churning the heck out of the account. I'd get stopped out, I would rebuy, I would get stopped out again, like, I don't know. With this one, you get in, you get stopped out. There might have been another circumstance where you get stopped out and it begins to uptick. So you rebuy real quick, then you get stopped out again, and then it goes. And like I used to do stuff like that, and I really try very hard to avoid it. Which isn't to say that I won't ever take the momentum trade that you took, or that I think it's a bad trade. I just think you got to recognize what it is, and that it's a trade that you can get stopped out of, but the thesis is still intact, the trade's still intact. It never proved that your idea was wrong. So sometimes you end up having to take a loss or a couple losses even before you even see that the idea was right, and actually get paid on it. As opposed to, if you're getting long at 10 a.m., maybe if the inside five low breaks, you don't fully know what the trade's wrong, but I can tell you for sure if you got long at 10 a.m. and the 9:45 a.m. low broke, you pretty much know that the idea itself is wrong. Maybe there's a lower probability situation where it still goes once in a while without you, but in that case, that's when I don't care. I'm not getting back in. So I think you need to be involved in that. From Rex. When creating two similar names with similar moves, would you create both of them or just focus on one and not get yourself the extra risk? For example, this morning I was trading Delta and United Airlines. Both of them are breaking out on the daily. Delta was the one that had the guidance, and UAL was a secondary play. I tried UAL at 9:45. I tried UAL at 9:45. Yeah, I think that's the one you called out. Um, at the inside five. I also saw Delta had a similar setup at 9:55. I would think that Delta would be a better mover since it's actually the one that got the news. It's a good way to think. I agree. But I didn't get in mainly because I got long UAL. Could you talk about it? Yeah. Um, it's a tricky thing. You're taking a lot of risk in one sector. So if the entire sector fails and you took both trades and you get stopped out, I don't have a rule for it, to be honest with you. And that's probably not a good thing, because I think in general it's a good thing to have rules that govern everything that you do in trading. But I really don't have a rule for it. I will occasionally find myself trading a couple or several of names that are going to trade together all at once, all together. Uh, it might be better in another circumstance to just focus on the leader. Sometimes, in this case, you had good setups in both. Sometimes you don't get a good setup in both, right? Sometimes you have DAL and UAL on the radar. Like, you have both on the radar and you thought DAL could be better, but UAL gave you the earlier setup and DAL hadn't set up. So sometimes you just end up in the one that gives you the setup. But in this case, they both gave you the setup. So I might end up getting involved in both, or I might take a little less risk in the second one. Again, I really don't have a hard fast rule on how I approach that. The answer for me personally is sometimes. So no, it doesn't help you very much. So my suggestion for you would be to consider making some rules about it. Maybe, I thought you have to take the UAL because you focused on it, and the setup was there first. But the question really was, do I take the leader on a setup when that's coming in after I'm already in the secondary? And I try to think that the answer to that is yes, but maybe not with massive risk. Another question though, what if DAL set up first and you were in DAL and now UAL is setting up first, but that's not the leader? Do you take UAL? Maybe in that instance the answer is no, right? Like, you had to take United. That was the first setup. DAL maybe never sets up. Maybe it just explodes on momentum and just continues and never lets you in. So I think I'm just thinking about it out loud with you. I think that if you take the secondary play first because that's the setup, and then the primary play gives you the setup, then maybe you put on a little risk with that as well. But if you took the primary play first as a setup, and then you take the secondary, and then the secondary sets up, maybe you don't take it, if that makes sense. I don't know. Just thinking out loud with you. From Cameron, can you talk about the difference in entry execution on Delta versus United? United required a lot more risk, would be the first thing I would say about it. Um, United being an opening drive trade that didn't have initial price time correction compared to DAL, which needed some time correction first. So you could have taken them both in the same way. You could have bought them both. You could have bought them both off the open versus levels, right? So really, what these are breakaway gap trades with news, right? So the resistance level that we had discussed in Delta was like 43 and 43 half. I wrote down in the alert 43 quarter. So, choose your area there, 43 quarter, 43. You're gapping above that. So you can buy Delta pretty much right at the open, right in the beginning of the day, and look for the breakaway gap trade versus the previous level. And that's what the trade was in Unity. It just required a lot more risk. In Delta, you could have gotten stock for as low as 43.37. You could have gotten in for as low as 13 cents risk. Unity, what I was saying, if you weren't in it in the beginning, if you weren't in it early like I was, they made it pretty difficult to get stock with where they actually opened it. Like for me, this was the same trade, just versus 37.50, the exact same trade. Now, I think that Unity, Delta gave a sick move today. Generally, I think Unity is going to have more reward potential. It's a higher beta tech stock. Delta's an airline, but Delta gave a sick move today for the type of stock that it is. So, in my mind, the extra space risk is justified for the extra reward potential that Unity could potentially give. But that's the exact same setup. I know a couple people got involved in Unity versus this opening low. That's actually more of the trade of what Ben did when we were talking about like the pure momentum trades. I don't like that as much, and I'm glad it worked. I think Paul was in it. The second candle here made a low. Nick was in it too. The second candle here made a low that didn't break the opening low by 2 cents. That I'm so glad that I held that low. And for the people that are stop finding conspiracy theorists, well, here's another great example of everyone stops very easily could have gotten triggered with a downtick by 2 more pennies, and it didn't happen. Um, but the truth of the matter is that it's almost random. 38.81 as the low versus 38.61 as the low before going. It's not really that much of a difference considering how this thing moved. So, I hate attributing anything in trading to luck, but the people who took the momentum trade in Unity off of the opening low got a little bit lucky. So, like that. They got unlucky by a bit too, and the low breaks by a penny, and stops that out. But this goes back to just being a pure momentum trade where the EDMA hasn't caught your stop. I don't love that. If you got strong conviction, I do do it, right? That's what I was saying obviously to Ben. I do do it. For Nick, for Paul, who took Unity off that opening low, I do it as well. But you just gotta recognize that you have a probability of shaking out with the trade still working, and that almost happened, but luckily for us, did not in Unity. And then yep, you're totally okay with getting stopped there. You have to be. And then the trade actually really really worked and went. Um, so we're kind of looking at several different trades, right? One is the breakaway gap trade, which in Unity for me, I'm giving it down to 37.50. Or for Delta, we mentioned 43 quarter. You also could have probably used 43 as a stop. That's a breakaway gap trade. Second thing we're talking about is a momentum style trade. Ben tried to do that with an inside five and up that failed at 940 ish in Delta versus Nick and Paul taking an opening drive momentum trade, if you want to call that, versus an opening low here as that thing kind of breaks higher on a news event situation. The third trade is that more patient, um, flag setup, right? Where Delta gives a bull flag, UAL gives a bull flag. Unity kind of just never really does that. It just goes and goes and goes. I guess eventually this ADMA catches up around 40, and there's a bit of a continuation trade there as well. Though honestly, that trade looks very tricky to me. Um, that's a different type of setup. That's taking an intraday pattern with the daily chart on your side, right? The daily chart's telling you, hey, we're breaking out. Hey, there's news. Hey, there's good volume. And the intraday chart is saying, hey, there's a good bull flag pattern here. So that's really three different types of trades. So the final part of your question here is, are there some cases when price time correction is not needed? It goes back to what we were saying with kind of Ben's trade. So Ben's trade and um Nick's trade versus kind of my trade or versus Rex trade. I prefer using the stop loss where I'm confident that my idea is wrong. And I tell you what, if Unity was getting below 3750, the ADMA would have been above 3750 for sure. I am 100% wrong on my ideas. I'm getting stopped out. For Rex buying Delta here off this lower on this inside 5 and up at 9:55 a.m. Like I said before, if this thing's getting below the 9:45 a.m. low, you're 100% wrong. Unity, if it breaks this low, you don't know that you're 100% wrong. Delta, if you get stopped out where Ben got stopped out, you don't know that you're 100% wrong. They're just different. They're different types of trades. The flip side is that if you didn't do what Nick and Paul did in Unity versus that opening low, you either needed to be willing to get down to 3750 like I was, or you're not getting stopped at all. And then you're missing, and then you're not getting the trade, right? So that's the flip side, and that's the benefit, by the way. We reviewed Ben's example of a momentum trade failing. The benefit of a momentum trade succeeding is that you get stopped like what Nick and Paul got to be able to capture that type of move. I still prefer, like, if for Nick and Paul's trade to not probably do it with a tremendous amount of risk if you're using that hard stop at the low and the ADMA hadn't caught up, similar to what I said to Ben. So they're just different trades, and I don't necessarily want to say that one's better than the other because there's different types of traders out there. Like, I'm not sure if Judy's listening to today's afternoon meeting. Judy's a phenomenal momentum trader. She trades, very different than I do, but when she writes into the VTF like, "Hey, I'm long this name, and this name," um, she's taking this stuff that's high, she's buying it high, she's looking to sell it even higher, and if it begins to pull back at all, she's keeping that super tight and she's getting out of the way very quickly. So for me, she's primarily, using stop losses that I don't want to use because for the way that I trade, for the way that my personality is, I don't feel confident with those stop losses because I don't know that the idea was wrong, and that's just kind of how I am as a trader. And so I don't care if the idea is right or wrong. I see the momentum coming in. I'm getting in. I'm keeping it tight. I want this momentum to come in. I can scalp this to the long side, and I can get paid on this trade, and I'm disciplined enough with this approach that it gives me consistency. For me, I struggle with that approach. It's not right for my personality. So, I don't want to say that either is necessarily right or wrong. I want to say that it's the trader and how you trade it and the rules that you build around it and the consistency that you have for yourself. So, great question, Cameron. I hope that helps. Scrolling through here in the VTF. Sorry, a lot of chatter. I'm just kind of reading through to make sure I'm not missing any questions that are directed towards me. I think Bandit just posted a question. I don't think I missed anything else in the VTF. Any advice to keeping a watch list tight during the day? Some days I feel like I overexpand upon my initial watch list as the day progresses and as named sectors come into play. You expand your watch list as the day progresses. I do the opposite. My watch list is biggest pre-market. I narrow it down going into the morning meeting. I narrow it down further going into the open, and then I take things kind of off the list. Like someone brought up AI in the meeting, and we talked about an RDR for AI. And it actually worked at 10:10. But for me, when it didn't break the opening low at 9:40 and then broke highs and gave this move, this actually then is coming off my watch list. Like I wanted this at 9:40 to break yesterday's low, give me an RDR so that I could get involved in it and I could capture this move. Now I feel like I'm looking at something that's failing. It gave a pivot low, it gave a new high on the day, and now it's post 10 a.m. and this thing is breaking the opening low, it's breaking yesterday's low. This thing just looks to me like it's just totally failing. So I take it off my watch list. So I think I do the literal opposite. And to the point where most of the time by midday, if it's 11:30, the things that were on my watch list in the morning, I'm either in them by that point or I'm not taking them almost always. And the only way that something would come on the list is if a new news event hits or, something major happens. So, I hope that helps. Let me check on YouTube to see if there's anything in there. Nope, nothing. What I'm seeing. All right, guys. Appreciate the questions. Good day today. It's after 5 o'clock, so I think we covered it all. I will see everybody tomorrow morning. Have a great night.